frame rater.
Starting with something you should all be able to accomplish, House of the Dead on the PC. This is not the world's greatest port by any stretch. In fact, it may require some tinkering to simply get to work on your modern PC. For one thing, you're required to have the game's disc in your system to play the soundtrack, so cracking the game to play without the disc isn't ideal. To play the soundtrack, I burned a CD with the tracks associated to the same location as the disc. This worked for me years ago, but for whatever reason, this no longer seems to work. Perhaps I did something wrong in the burning process, or this has been changed somehow in Windows 10, but regardless, it is quite a hassle to get the soundtrack to play. Now, House of the Dead on PC is traditionally played with a mouse. However, with various different setups, you could play with alternative Lightgun options. These are not officially supported, but some applications have made it a little bit easier, and that would be the application known as Troubleshooter 2, that has a setup specifically for House of the Dead, which you can use in association with an AimTrak Lightgun. It requires a sensor bar much like the Nintendo Wii. When I finished setting everything up, the AimTrak was still not a very comfortable option. The Crosshair was jittery and I wasn't able to find a way to use it as a regular Lightgun. It was basically the same as using a Wiimote, which was not what I had hoped for going in. I'm not trying to discredit the AimTrak, I've heard it's a lovely gun if you know what you're doing. Even if you do know what you're doing, it'll take patience to get this to work right with the PC version using an AimTrak, so I don't consider this a very ideal choice for playing the game at home with a Lightgun. We're not done with the PC quite yet, as there exists an emulator for the original arcade hardware. The Model 2 emulator is capable of running the House of the Dead flawlessly. However, when it comes to using the AimTrak Lightgun, is it any better than the PC version? Well, you'll get a far more authentic experience since it uses the original arcade graphics and everything. After all, it is the original. First things first though, you're going to want to open the game's BIOS settings and change the gun calibration. By default, it's a bit off. I hear they did this intentionally so the person maintaining the machine could first get a bit of a grasp on how to interact with it. You can also change options like the blood color here if you like. By default, it's green. For some reason, the actual Crosshair doesn't match my mouse, which is kinda weird. Anyways, I suppose I should explain how exactly this AimTrak weapon works with the computer. It's essentially just emulating a mouse. You can set what the buttons do in an application which comes with the device. I found calibrating the thing through the software often softlocks my PC in a state where my mouse gets stuck on the bottom left of the screen. It's not very pleasant. If you do manage to set it up properly, you can play House of the Dead in all its original glory, but if you're not willing to fight tooth and nail, you're going to, like the PC version, be using a Crosshair. Light guns that work with sensor bars are still capable of getting an accurate shot. In fact, House of the Dead 2 and 3 on the Nintendo Wii have an option to set up the Wiimote as if it were a real light gun, to be used without any crosshair. The results are rather shocking. It isn't perfect, but damn close. In terms of playing those two classics at home, I'd say the Wii is the easiest choice. You can also play them on the Xbox original with a light gun, which you would have to buy separately. And I've been told that House of the Dead 2 isn't unlockable, so you won't be able to play it right away. I've heard these two can even be played on the PlayStation 3 with PlayStation Move, and yeah, for some reason they did not enable GunCon support, despite the PS3 has a GunCon. I heard it had something to do with royalty fees. Pretty annoying. So yeah, in regards to playing these on the PlayStation 3, you're faced again with buying more peripherals if you don't own the Move, which I imagine most people don't. But regardless of that, in reflection of using the AimTrak with the Model 2 emulator, it's fine. It's a bit of a step above using the mouse, but then again, your performance in the gameplay itself will suffer comparatively. You can do this, you can have fun, but it still falls short. If the sensor bar isn't really the problem, maybe it's all about the software. While I believe I've exhausted my options with the AimTrak, we can still try out a PC-enabled Wiimote sensor and use Nintendo's controllers in the same fashion as the AimTrak. I use what is known as the Mayflash Dolphin bar. Without any added software, the Wiimote is an experience. First there was the PC version, which for some reason I couldn't move the cursor above the halfway mark, at least until I had gotten into the game where it'd interact fine. Guess it was a resolution thing. The oddness didn't stop there though, as the cursor was, like with the AimTrak, very jerky. In fact, it was considerably worse than it. I looked into this and all the solutions didn't help. One being to provide space between you and the sensor, which didn't change anything. Thought I should mention, by default button B is shoot, and button A is to reload, so that was kinda neat. Looking for solutions online results in pretty much exclusively troubleshooting this for the Dolphin emulator, but I wanted to troubleshoot its interaction with the mouse in Windows. I feel like there's probably a solution out there somewhere, but I can't find it. I tried using the aforementioned method with the Model 2 emulator and it was pretty well as expected. Somewhat worse than using the AimTrak, and as such, not something I would pursue. Finally, we've reached the last option of playing the game outside of buying the arcade machine. This, as far as I'm concerned, is the best way of playing the original game at home, for now. This is the official Sega Saturn port of the game, made when the source code was still intact. The reason this game's actually had no support since then is because at some point it had unfortunately been lost in the Sega archives during a corporate reshuffling. It's uncertain whether this code even exists anymore. I've heard they're doing a remake of the first game, but who knows how faithful that's actually going to turn out to be. At least we got this. However, and yes, there's always a however, being able to play House of the Dead on your Sega Saturn is expensive, and it doesn't matter which way you go about it. The American release is practically out of the picture since it goes for a solid fraction of the cost of an original House of the Dead arcade machine. I'd only imagine buying a copy is for the die-hard fans or Sega Saturn enthusiasts. Thankfully, the American release is nearly, if not identical to the Japanese release, save for one thing, which I'll mention later. But the Sega Saturn is not a region-free console. Thankfully, region differences can be bypassed with a very useful attachment, the Action Replay cart. Again, not cheap. This is a must-own for Sega Saturn gamers though, since it unlocks a far more expansive library than the limited one we have in the West. To be completely honest with you, if you're thinking of getting a Saturn, just import a Japanese one. They'll usually end up being cheaper. The games were far more popular there, so in most cases importing a Japanese Saturn game will cost less than buying the American equivalent locally. Even then though, to go through with all this requires you get a Sega Saturn, Action Replay cart, copy of House of the Dead imported from Japan, and for the experience we're aiming for, a Sega Stunner Lightgun. I wanted the most authentic experience I could get, so I went out to buy 2 Sega Stunners. And guess what? The first one I got doesn't even work right. Some CRT sets I tried it with are entirely inaccurate. Others I couldn't use past a meter's distance from the screen. I had to wait for the second one to arrive to really engage in the game as it was meant to be played. Oh right, you'll also need to own a CRT television since the Sega Stunner is unusable with modern displays, as all light guns from before the standard of HD are not. The Saturn setup will take your money and your space. Is this a worthy investment to you? For me, barely. For someone just wanting a run of their old nostalgic favorite, doubtful. I'd say if you're not overly enthusiastic about this, go with the Model 2 emulator. But in that case, probably with a mouse, because the AimTrak Lightgun isn't exactly a cheap investment either. The Wiimote sensors for PC don't go for too much, so that's undoubtedly the cheapest method of playing House of the Dead without a mouse, if you're going for that route, but it's still not going to be anything like the original experience. Should you get a good condition stunner for the Saturn, a CRT, and all those other requirements, then there you go. You've got the best at-home experience outside of buying an original arcade cabinet. I've done a lot of looking over the years, and I'm fairly confident of my findings, but there could very well be another solution out there I just couldn't find. Over the years I put so much money into modern light gun solutions, and they never worked out as I had hoped. While we're here, I figured I'd talk a bit more about this Sega Saturn release of the game. Might as well take advantage of this opportunity. First things first, blood options are missing. In the US and European releases, you can enter a cheat code in the menu to open a bonus menu where you change the color. You can also do things such as add infinite lives. The Japanese release, which is the one I have here, has said cheat, but no selection for blood color is available. Also for those wondering, the European release is just about as expensive as the American one. So you remember how this first Sega Stunner I bought was kinda borked? Well, after having some friends over to attempt multiplayer, by some stroke of luck, the gun actually works a lot better now. I've done nothing to it since I last used it. Technology does as it will, I suppose. 2-player House of the Dead on the Saturn is great, but even with this official release, it isn't perfect. The first thing I'll say is that the Stunner light gun, unfortunately, in my opinion, is not all that great. It's comfortable enough in the hands, I suppose, a bit blocky in comparison with the GunCon 2, but it's nothing I couldn't get used to. For me, the worst part is the trigger, especially for a game like House of the Dead where you're basically to spam it. It requires more pulling action than I'm used to, which is kind of exhausting after extended play. I'm assuming this was designed with Virtual Cop in mind. Then also consider the position you'll be in while playing the game. If you have a basic home entertainment setup, chances are you'll be holding your arm in an elevated position, which isn't really how these games were meant to be played. Sure, you could find some way of elevating your display, but with the weight of a CRT, it's gonna be a hassle regardless. On the subject of gun calibration, House of the Dead has probably the most limited options I've ever seen. It only has one point of impact used to determine the entire display, which doesn't help for accuracy. For relevancy, I've found the gun to be mostly accurate in the game, but there are times where it doesn't react to the screen how I'd like it to. Sometimes it won't react at all, which could be a problem with the gun, but I'm fairly confident at least somewhat this has to do with the lackluster calibration. The most annoying problem is when the gun seems to think I'm shooting outside of the screen to reload when I most definitely am not. I've taken many unnecessary hits because of this, but hey, it's still a major improvement over a Crosshair, I think. If you don't end up getting a Stunner, you can actually play the Saturn release with a Crosshair, however you'll be using the D-pad to guide it around. Probably the least effective method of moving a Crosshair. It's okay, I guess, but makes quick movements very difficult. You can speed up the Crosshair, but that's like a band-aid to a hatchet wound. Oh, and you're also not shooting the gun at the TV. That's the game's largest appeal in the first place. I mean, I'm beyond happy the option is there, but I wouldn't play like this personally. If you're gonna get this without a Stunner, I'd say don't bother. Maybe in 1998, but nowadays, you can just do the same with emulating the M2 release, so might as well. In conclusion, those are the current options for House of the Dead at home. I feel like I should make a meme out of this. The options are limited, complicated, and expensive. It's doable, but it's not very fun to pursue. By the time you finally got the best setup for your situation, are you even gonna care that much anymore? Well, at least now I've got a sort of future-proof method. The Saturn release with a working Stunner. Was it worth it? I don't know, man, but at least I got to share the experience with you. And my friends, because I know my pals and I are far from playing the last of it. But on my own terms, I'm just gonna wait for that Sinden and hope it's all it claims to be. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you Frame Raiders in the next video.